Ladies and gentlemen, we ask that you please take your seats at this time as the program will begin momentarily.
Mixed methods research. So how to combine different methods, quantitative methods, qualitative methods in research designs for specific purposes. So you can combine methods, of course, in all kinds of sequences, but typically you want to answer a specific research question, and that is, you do need to take care of the sequence of your specific methods, and you will see this in the different designs I introduce in a minute. The sequence is, so to say, related to the type of research questions you have and where you want to start with collecting data and how you want to combine these with different and other forms of data you collect in the sequence of your research design. So typically you try to raise the validity of by combining the different methods and their weaknesses and strengths. So what are the benefits of this approach? Typically you get a kind of triangulation of different data sources, so you can combine the different data sources, you get a more complete picture. Sometimes you need additional data to explain some findings you had. Some qualitative data can explain some quantitative data or illustrate cases out of the quantitative data you collected. You can also use iterations of the same type of data collection to raise your quality or develop an instrument for measuring a specific concept you want to measure and you need in your design. So what are typical types of mixed method designs? I introduce you to some. So first, to start with the convergent parallel design. So of course you can combine quantitative and qualitative data collection, and you do that typically by complementing and relating the findings you have from quantitative and qualitative data. So you could use a questionnaire you roll out to a lot of people, so you get good measurements, you get high numbers of participants, and then you use a smaller number with a more time-intensive qualitative data collection with interviews that help you to explain and interpret some of the quantitative findings you have. So the convergent design, collect them together, think about the combinations. Second, of course, you can sequence these by first collecting quantitative data, analyze the data, and then even use this data either to interpret your quantitative findings, so use additional qualitative data collection for the interpretation of your data, or even interpret that data with your focus groups, for example. So you could do quantitative data collection, analyze the data, reflect on the findings, do a qualitative data collection to help you with interpretation. The other way around, you can of course also do an exploratory sequential design. You could start with a qualitative data collection, and this helps you to construct, for example, a questionnaire or a measurement instrument, and interpret the findings then when you see what comes out of the quantitative data measurement, for example, with a factorial analysis, or identify if the factors that you have found in the qualitative data are confirmed by the quantitative data. So this is typically used when you, for example, build a measurement instrument, and you can do several iterations of that. A third one, or fourth one, of course, you can embed also either qualitative or quantitative data in the collection. So you could have, for example, a simple example is where you do longitudinal studies, and while you send out questionnaires to your participants, you can of course also ask them to collect daily journals and collect some qualitative data you can later on integrate with the same way around. Or you do it exactly the other way around. you do a qualitative data collection, and then to collect more data on a more long-term or several iterations, you could ask them to do a kind of experience sampling and collect quantitative data on a mobile questionnaire, for example. So there are all kinds of, the difference probably between the embedded design and the sequential designs you have seen before, that the data is collected at the same time and you have to think about the consequences of this. So, and then of course, in all these contexts, if you do longer term projects, for example, I would say most multi-year projects have a kind of multi-phase design, where you use different evaluation methods in different phases of the development of a product or of an artifact. Of course, you typically start with qualitative designs that these informed probably a mixed method study. You can interpret your first results. You do another embedded or mixed method, and this shapes typically an experimental study or also summative study at the end of your product cycle and of your development cycle. A typical example is a product we have developed that is a kind of coaching instrument for doing presentations. And there typically we exactly did that. We did interviews with experts at the beginning. We did some prototyping studies in several iterations. And then we went into an experimental study. So I presented you 6 types of mixed method approaches. There is a lot of literature you find also in the text documents to read if you want to explore in more depth. And to take away for this, think about the combinations and embed or sequence your research methods dependent on the questions you want to answer. And you have exploratory ways, you have explanatory ways. So the sequence is important for what kind of questions you can answer. And of course, also the data can be combined and triangulated in different ways. And if you have a longer term project, of course, be sure to think in multi-phase sequencing of mixed methods. Thank you.